The afternoon sunlight pierced through the broken wooden slats of the warehouse, illuminating millions of dust motes dancing in the air like suspended gold. In that precise moment, time seemed to freeze. James stood there, his breath hitched in his throat, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted a crown woven from wild white flowers on Tu Diep's head. She was no longer the fugitive girl in ragged clothes, covered in grime. Standing before him, bathed in the golden hour glow, she looked like a muse stepping out of a Renaissance painting. She was wearing a dress that defied logic, a masterpiece created from discarded curtains and scraps of lace found in the trash. Yet it hugged her silhouette with the elegance of a high-end bridal gown. This was the opening hook, the promise of beauty amidst chaos, before the memory rewinded to 3 hours earlier. 3 hours prior, the atmosphere was starkly different. The silence in the abandoned factory was heavy and suffocating. Diep sat curled up by the rusted window frame, looking out at the dirt road far below. Through the cracked glass, she watched a small procession passing by in the village. It was a countryside wedding. The bride, though dressed simply in a rented red ao dye, looked radiant, holding a bouquet of plastic flowers, surrounded by laughter and firecrackers. Diep looked down at her own attire, a torn t-shirt stained with engine oil and baggy trousers that had lost their color. She instinctively tucked her callous hands, rough from days of hard labor, under her armpits, trying to hide them. A single tear escaped, tracing a clean line through the dust on her cheek. It wasn't jealousy, it was a deep, aching sense of loss. A realization that as long as they were running, a normal happiness like that was a luxury she could never afford. James saw it all. He was standing in the shadows, holding a can of beans, his heart tightening painfully. He realized that survival wasn't just about food or evading bulldozers. It was about keeping the human spirit alive. He couldn't give her a banquet or a diamond ring, but he possessed a pair of hands that could fix engines and build shelters. Surely they could create a moment of magic. His eyes scanned the messy room, searching for anything, absolutely anything, that could be transformed. His gaze landed on a pile of debris in the corner. There, buried under old newspapers, was a set of vintage curtains, creamy white fabric, heavy and textured, likely discarded from a renovated hotel years ago. Next to it was a roll of mosquito netting that resembled tulle. An insane idea sparked in his mind. He walked over, grabbed a rusty pair of industrial scissors, and turned to Diep with a determination that startled her. "Stand up," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Don't look at them. Look at me. We don't need their wedding. I'll make you the most beautiful bride this world has ever seen, right here, right now." James began to work with a frenetic yet focused energy. He didn't know how to sew professionally, but he understood structure and geometry. He draped the heavy curtain fabric over Diep's shoulders, using safety pins and pieces of wire to mark the waistline. The sound of the scissors slicing through the thick fabric, snip, snip, crunch, echoed rhythmically in the empty space, creating a strange. He tore the mosquito netting into strips to create layers of ruffles, mimicking the softness of chiffon. Diep stood still, acting as his mannequin, her eyes widening as she watched his rough, oil-stained hands maneuver the delicate fabric with surprising tenderness. For the first time in weeks, the fear in her eyes was replaced by a flicker of hope. The transformation process was intense and mesmerizing. James sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, the afternoon sun highlighting the sweat beads on his forehead. He used a fishing line as thread, meticulously stitching the pleats of the makeshift skirt. Without a sewing machine, every stitch had to be done by hand, pulling the thick needle through layers of fabric with sheer force. The dress began to take shape, a corseted bodice made from the stiff curtain header, flowing into a voluminous skirt softened by the mosquito net overlay. To hide the rough seams and the rust stains on the fabric, he used a sharp knife to scrape white chalk from the walls, creating a powder that he rubbed into the fabric, brightening it. It wasn't perfect. It was raw, industrial, and utterly unique. It was a dress born from grit, a testament to the fact that beauty can bloom even in the bleakest wasteland. While James focused on the dress, Diep wasn't idle. Caught up in his enthusiasm, she ran outside to the overgrown patch of land behind the warehouse. She gathered armfuls of wild daisies, small purple weeds, and long vines of ivy. Her hands, usually busy with survival tasks, now worked with delicate precision. She wove the vines into a rustic circle, tucking the white flowers in to create a crown. She found a piece of red wire, likely from an old electrical cord, and twisted it into two small, imperfect rings. The simplicity of the act brought a flush of color to her pale cheeks. For a fleeting hour, they weren't refugees. They were just a young couple preparing for the most important day of their lives. Finally, the moment of reveal arrived, the payoff that justified all the effort. James helped Diep step into the dress. He tied the back with a cord taken from his boots. When she turned around to face the broken mirror propped against the wall, a gasp escaped her lips. The curtain's heavy fabric gave the dress a regal structure, while the net layers added a dreamlike ethereality. The dirt and grime on her face didn't matter anymore. They only highlighted her bright, teary eyes. James approached her, holding the flower crown. He gently placed it on her messy hair, his fingers lingering on her cheek. The golden light from part 1 flooded the room again, completing the loop. "I, James, take you, Diep," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. There was no priest, no altar, only the humming of insects and the distant rumble of machinery. "To be my partner in this chaos, to protect you when the world crumbles, to find beauty with you in the trash." He slid the red wire ring onto her finger. It was rough and scratched her skin slightly, but to Diep, it felt heavier and more precious than the purest gold. She slid the matching ring onto his finger, choking back a sob. "I, Diep, take you, to run with you, to fight with you until the end of the road." They stood there, embracing in the dying light of the day. The camera panned out, capturing the stark contrast. Two small figures in a vast, decaying industrial ruin, dressed in trash, yet looking like royalty. The scene was a powerful visual metaphor. Their love was the only thing that made sense in a senseless world. The episode didn't end with a cliffhanger or a threat. It ended with a moment of pure, undisturbed peace, allowing the audience to savor the visual satisfaction of the dress and the emotional weight of their vows. It was a necessary pause, a deep breath of fresh air before the inevitable storm of the next episode would crash down upon them.
Giữa âm thanh rộn ràng của một đám cưới làng, Diệp lặng lẽ trốn sau gốc cây, giấu đi ước mơ được làm cô dâu trong bộ váy trắng. Nhìn vợ tủi thân, James đau đớn nhận ra sống sót là chưa đủ. Trở về căn nhà gỗ còn dang dở, anh tìm thấy bộ rèm ren cổ và quyết định biến nó thành váy cưới cho cô. Bằng đôi tay chai sạn, anh cắt, khâu tường chỉ mũi thủ công, rồi hái hoa rừng kết thành vương miện, thổi hồn thiên nhiên vào lớp ren trắng. Khi hoàng hôn buông xuống, căn nhà nghèo hóa thành thánh đường lung linh ánh nến. Diệp bước ra rạng rỡ như nữ thần, tìm lại giấc mơ tưởng đã mất. Trong không gian riêng tư, James trao chiếc nhẫn cỏ và lời hứa về một tương lai xứng đáng hơn. Giữa nghèo khó, họ vẫn có giàu nhất vì tình yêu.